Welcome to the last in our current series, there will be more, of 3 episodes from Taxpayers Against Poverty about tackling the crisis of low-income families and unaffordable housing. Now today we look at how all this unnecessary hardship suffered by millions every day could have been avoided if we'd had the political will. And with courage and compassion we could ensure adequate minimum incomes and truly affordable housing for all our people, our fellow citizens, because we share a moral responsibility to ensure that everyone in our country has a decent standard of living. We can resolve this man-made tragedy. If we can save the banks, we can save the homeless. I'm Tom Burgess, and I will be talking to the frontline campaigner, the Reverend Paul Nicholson, the founder of Taxpayers Against Poverty, who was the initiator of the original minimum income standards, which became the real living wage. He has relentlessly campaigned and cared for those on low incomes for most of his 87 years with dignity and determination. He also knows what needs to be done. This is his story. Now, I started by asking Paul, could all this hardship have been avoided?
Most certainly it could have been avoided, and indeed attempts were made to persuade the government that they should not pass the welfare reform and local government finance bills they did pass in 2012. Particularly we, with the help of peers and members of parliament, when I was then chairman of the Zacchaeus 2000 Trust, put down amendments for debate which asked the government to undertake an assessment, a health impact assessment of the proposals they were making for cutting incomes and cutting housing benefits and cutting council tax benefits, because they were going to inevitably make people hungry, which makes people ill. But at each stage, this was refused. The welfare reform bill set up the shredding of benefit systems. Following that, the benefit system had £18 million taken out of it first and then 12 million second. So there'll be about 30 million taken out of the benefit system, which is inevitably going to make people ill. Like, I don't see how you could think about it any other way. The Local Government Finance Act abolished council tax benefits and asked all the councils to create their own council tax benefit system. Meanwhile, George Osborne reduced the central government funding of the council tax benefit by 10%, which meant there was a shortfall for councils already having their benefit, their grants cut and their funding cut. And so what happened here in Haringey was that they decided to pass the shortfall on to benefit claimants. So Haringey was, and indeed about 236 councils all decided to pass the shortfall on to benefit claimants. So they're taxing benefits. So the £73.10, as we've been saying already, is taxed. However, a long 6-year campaign in Haringey, with the help of the local Labour Party, because it is a Labour council, we managed to persuade the council not, Taxpayers Against Poverty managed to persuade the council not to continue taxing benefits, and they're not taxing family benefits for the current year, and April 20, the single adult benefits will not be taxed. And there's really no reason, if one council could do it, why the other councils who are doing it should not stop doing it, because it is damaging health.
So what happened then, that the Welfare Reform Act, combined with the Local Government Finance Bill, actually cut money for welfare benefit, shifted some of that onto the local authorities, and their money was also cut?
Yes.
So really what we were doing, we were making matters worse for everybody, and therefore not a very compassionate thing to do. It just made life more difficult for people.
It made things worse, and it was done without any health impact assessment, and they were asked to undertake that health impact assessment, which they refused to do. The upshot now is that, undoubtedly connected to it, and we've got on our website all the evidence that austerity policy with benefits has meant that the expectation of life has stalled and the infant deaths have increased. That's a very, very serious matter. It was made worse by, at the same time, a housing market which just made rents increase. So you've got incomes going down or stalled as a matter of government policy, On the other hand, you've got a free market in housing where the rents are allowed to go up as much as you like. And indeed, the council rents get increased as well. We happen to be celebrating the 100th year of the Addison Act. It paved the way for Harold Macmillan to build 500,000 council houses a year in the 1950s. So we've got this dreadful toxic mixture of low incomes going down and rents going up, damaging health. It's also making people homeless. And the House of Commons Library produces the figures on homeless families in temporary accommodation. What we know from the House of Commons Library is that in 2011 there were 48,010 homeless families in temporary accommodation in England. That had increased to 83,700 in 2018. And there are no policies whatever to put those 83,700 families into permanent homes. In other words, we are desperately short of homes for people on low incomes, and they are not in homes, they are not secure. And of that 83,700, the vast majority are in London, and it's 56,880 in London, which is 68% of the total. But rather more worrying is that 124,000 of the 83,700 are children. So families with children are totally insecure. I visit them here in Haringey. I'm working with the temporary accommodation group of employed people. There are 5 of them who are the temporary accommodation group, and they are employed. It's not as if there are low-income employed people. And we've got 3,000 families in temporary accommodation here in Haringey with 5,208 children. The only plan the council has got is to build 1,000 council houses. One of the great difficulties is the method of funding council housing through the viability assessment means they take council land. Developers like Lend-Lease can't make enough profit if they build them all at truly affordable council housing at council house rents. The difference between council house rent for a 2-bed and private rent for 2-bed is the difference between £90 a week and £300 a week. And it's on the £300 a week private that the developer can make their profit. So they cut the number of families in £90 a week equivalent housing as little as possible. So we get less and less and less council housing. The only truly affordable council housing is council housing because it's built on public land. And if it's built on public land, you can cut the land out of the market and it can stay there forever. We're gradually losing public land, and that means there is less and less solutions for low-income people to have permanent, secure accommodation. When you take that to the current case I'm trying to help, which is a family of 4 in one of the 2 hostels in Haringey in a single room, and no one knows how long they'll be in that single room. There's been a dreadful muddle putting them in there, and that resulted in the council charging her, saying she's got an overpayment, which is her fault, of benefits. So they paid her too much housing benefit and they want it back. You've got the job centre just round the corner here saying we paid you too much universal credit and we want it back. And it's hardly surprising that she is desperately upset. She has a child with mental health difficulties who is desperately upset too, and a husband who is under immigration controls and has no idea how long he'll be able to stay here. That kind of mess. There's another family in temporary accommodation where the wife doesn't have a British passport, so she doesn't get any benefits. They had their 3rd child before they knew that there's a 2-child policy and you don't get benefits for the 3rd. They discovered they don't get benefits for the 3rd when they formed up at the job centre to apply for them. So there are 5 of them living on 3 people's benefits. One of the children is very severely disabled. I mean, he's part blind and physically disabled. What we're trying to do for them is to get Enfield Council to agree that that child will not be moved from its current school, while if they put them into permanent accommodation, they won't be put into private accommodation, which will require that child's benefits to be used for the rent. And they won't. And we've got lawyers working on that. Whether or not there's anything can be done about it, I really don't know. And that actually does raise the huge point. If you put families in temporary accommodation, some of them are there for 10 years. They're there for 10 years and they can be moved during that time simply at the whim of the landlord or the council. So one landlord decides that he is a buy-to-let landlord, and therefore he wants to take the profit on his land, therefore they have to go. So the council has to put them somewhere else. Or another landlord might simply not be able to pay the mortgage, and therefore they have to go because the house is repossessed by the mortgage company. And that moves them on as well. Another reason why they have to move again is because they are forced by the council to go into the first offer they are made. It doesn't matter, they can't refuse it, and under those circumstances they're put into absolutely filthy accommodation, which no one should be put in. They're simply not fit for human habitation. So they then have to be moved out and moved on to somewhere else. One of the more distressing aspects of it is that the council won't move them until the bailiff is at the door changing the locks, because they're not legally homeless until the locks are changed. So they get 2 months waiting for the locks to be changed when the council should be doing something to move them somewhere or arrange for them to be moved as soon as the locks are changed. That doesn't happen, so they're out on the street with their suitcase and their children and told to go to the council office with that kit, and they have to wait for 8 hours in the council office. This is a true story. And in the 8 hours they're put in a hostel with a single men's hostel where they are with drug addicts and alcoholics. There again, they had to get a lawyer to move them out. All that's going on during the children's education. So the children's education is disrupted over 10 years, in some cases, or even over 2 or 3 years, or even over 1 year, by this failure to provide secure, permanent homes to low-income families.
Key word really, secure, because it's very difficult to get your life in order when it's not secure and things, you don't know what's going to happen the next day.
Secure is absolutely key word. You know, if you're being moved around, you may be torn out of your job, torn out of your community. You have no community life, really. And the children particularly, you see, have to be torn out of their friendships, out of their school. We have a real mess in the homeless area with no policies available at all from national or local government as to how to cope with it.
So how can we fix this?
Yeah. There are two things. I mean, there's the desperate urgency of the homeless families, which can only get more serious. And I have to say, I'm desperately worried about Brexit. You see, if we're going to increase the costs as a result of leaving EU, the already bad situation is going to be made worse for these low-income homeless families or low-income families who are not yet homeless. There will be more homeless families and more hungry families if the costs go up. Every warning is the costs will go up, so local authorities are not prepared to deal with the increased number of homeless families that will result as a result of Brexit. So we've got a crisis which is going to have a crisis added to it. That is the emergency. Now, for the emergency, what clearly needs to be done is that every way of creating more homes quickly has to be undertaken, and that means filling empty property, existing empty property, existing empty houses, existing empty land, empty office buildings, and having a major priority program of refurbishment of those properties for current homeless families and individuals, and to put them in there as permanent homes, secure homes. Finland has done this with unemployed adults, and of course, without strings, they are in there, they're their homes, and their homes forever. We really have to think in those terms about being human at last, having some kind of humanity and compassion about the kind of policy that we operate. So that's one of them. Government can find the money for that. The other one is building. And at the moment, the building is held up, I think, both by the liability assessments, which we talked about, because building for low-income families is held up by that because it takes away the amount of land that's available for home-income families. So that has to go. That rotten procedure of financing the building of homes for low-income families just simply has to go. And then it's a question of providing money. And my own dream is that if you can find the money to save the banks, you can find the money to save the homeless. The banks were saved by quantitative easing, and the homeless can be saved by quantitative easing. And that means setting up the structures to enable the money to get to the right places as quickly as possible to get the building done. And that means as much deregulation as possible. What I would like to see is a national housing bank which is properly funded by government, by the finance sector and by the Bank of England, anyway, to give them the money to make sure that the houses are built.
On that point then, so really those funds would go to buy the land, which would then be publicly owned?
Not only to buy the land, but to build the homes. Absolutely right.
The current cost of a house, like 70% is the land, is that right?
Absolutely.
So only 30% is the house, so the house hasn't got much to build. But it's so expensive because 70% of the cost is the land. So if you can take the land element out, is what you're suggesting, then we're going to have more affordable homes.
Well, that is exactly the principle which has been used. It's opposed by the Conservative Party because they don't like the state doing anything. They forget that that's what Harold Wilson did. They forget that it's nothing to do with politics or whether or not the state does it. It's actually a highly intelligent way of building homes for low-income families. And if, by the way, over the years, a low-income family does well, don't move them out of their homes because they're moving them out of their communities. They're moving their children out. And if they've got more money, they're putting more money back into the community in which they live. So that's what, again, right-wing politicians come up and say, of course, look, they've got people, wealthy people living in state-subsidised houses. Well, not necessarily subsidised because the rent will pay for the building eventually. It's absolutely vital to get the land out of the market in perpetuity, and that is one of the schemes which we would hope would begin to catch on and be liked by a broader part of the community. It'll be an enormous political battle because of this dislike of funding things through the state. I don't see why you shouldn't. If you can fund the banks through the state, you can save the homeless through the state. Again, they must be saved, and there's no other way of doing it.
So to help make this happen, Taxpayers Against Poverty has drafted a new social housing bill that proposes that quantitative easing, the process used to save the banks, is used to buy land and to put it into public ownership and then to build 300,000 homes available for social rent in 3 years. The increasing value of the land remains in public ownership as a public asset shared by all, rather than individual speculators. The biggest cause of homelessness is the inability to pay the high rent, which means that families have to take options like deciding whether to eat or heat or pay the rent. And it's usually the heating and eating and family needs that come first. So with more affordable homes, this will go a long way to reducing these dreadful dilemmas. However, this is not all. We are campaigning for more compassion when it comes to the insecurity of living in temporary accommodation, and of course those that can afford neither, the rough sleepers. Homelessness can be solved. We just need to come together and change the political will. It's a priority. It is what we, the people, want. It's not too difficult. If we believe we can do it, we can and we will. So what do you think? You can find out more on our website, taxpayersagainstpoverty.org, where you can contact us if you'd like to comment, donate or get involved. And we've got loads of resources on there of facts and figures and information and personal stories. Thank you for listening. I'm Tom Burgess on behalf of Taxpayers Against Poverty. This podcast is partnered with the Real Agenda Network of podcasts for political change. More at realagenda.org.